No way, Paul.
Trudeau talking to premiers, holding rare Monday caucus meeting as protests continue. Hey everybody, Phenomenus here. Today I'm looking at further actions the government can take. This is an hour ago on the CBC News. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is calling the premiers this morning and holding a rare Monday caucus meeting as the convoy protests in Ottawa stretches into its third week. Sources who were not authorized to speak publicly told CBC News Trudeau will brief the premiers and discuss ongoing blockades and protests across the country. The meeting is expected to take place at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. It follows meeting Sunday on the federal cabinet and the cabinet's incident response group. Trudeau tweeted late Sunday that the IARG discussed further actions the government can take to help end the blockades and occupations. End quote. Earlier that day, Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair told Rosie Barton Live the federal government has discussed invoking special emergency powers to deal with ongoing protests in Ottawa. Blair described the attitude around invoking the Emergencies Act, which has never been implemented before, as appropriate caution rather than reticence. The law gives the federal government carte blanche to cope with a crisis. The legislation, which replaced the War Measures Act, defines a national emergency as a temporary, urgent, and critical situation that seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians and is of such proportions or nature as to exceed the capacity or authority of a province to deal with it. While Blair emphasized it was important to make sure that the appropriate authorities that are with the provinces are fully utilized, he said the federal government was prepared to do everything necessary. The War Measures Act was most famously used by Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau during the FLQ crisis. Now, what happened during the FLQ crisis? Well, let's see, does it sound anything similar to what's happening now in Ottawa and around Canada? Let's see. The October Crisis refers to a chain of events that started in October of 1970 when members of the Front de Libération du Québec, I suck at French, FLQ, kidnapped the provincial deputy premier Pierre Laporte and British diplomat James Cross from his Montreal residence. These events saw the Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau invoking the War Measures Act for the first time in Canadian history during peacetime. The Premier of Quebec, Robert Bourassa, and the Mayor of Montreal, John Diaper. I don't know. It's like Drapier or something. Supported Trudeau's invocation of the War Measures Act, which limited civil liberties and granted the police far-reaching powers, allowing them to arrest and detain 497 people. The government of Quebec also requested military aid to support the civil authorities, with Canadian forces being deployed throughout Quebec. Although negotiations led to Cross's release, Laporte was murdered by the kidnappers. The crisis affected the province of Quebec, Canada, especially the metropolitan area of Montreal, and ended on December 28th. At the time, opinion polls in Quebec and throughout Canada showed widespread support for the usage of the War Measures Act. The response was criticized by prominent politicians such as René Lévesque and Tommy Douglas. After the crisis, movements that pushed for electoral votes as a means to attain autonomy and independence grew stronger. At the time, support also grew for the sovereigntist political party known as Parti Québécois, which formed the provincial government in 1976. So, there's kidnappings, and I know there was bombings, and a murder. Has anything like that happened in today's crisis? Yeah, bouncy castles and cotton candy. Yep, pretty much on par with what happened in the past. It's just striking resemblance. But you know, when you got a little bitch in Parliament there in charge, you're gonna get the extreme measures taken. So, under the in the Emergency Act, it would partly fall under public order emergency. which has a regulation and prohibition of any assembly that may reasonably be expected to lead to a breach of the peace, travel to, from, or within any specified area, or use of specified property. B. The designation and securing of protected places. C. The assumption of control and the restoration and maintenance of public utilities and services. D. The authorization of or direction to any person or any person of a class of persons to render essential services of a type that that person or a person of that class is competent to provide, and the provision of reasonable compensation in respect of services so rendered. So they could just take anyone in any position and make them work for them, basically. Imposition. I. On summary conviction of a fine not exceeding $500 or imprisonment not exceeding 6 months, or both the fine and imprisonment, or on indictment of a fine not exceeding $5,000 or imprisonment not exceeding 5 years, or both that fine and imprisonment. Contravention of any order or regulation made under this section. Restriction, or a declaration of public order emergency specifies that the effects of the emergency extend only to a specified area of Canada. Power under subsection 1 to make orders and regulations, and any powers, duties, or functions conferred or imposed by or pursuant to any such order or regulation may be exercised or performed only with respect to that area. It goes on and on, but it gives them a lot of powers, and I'm not sure, because I mean the Emergency Act is it's like basically 4 acts in one, right? Let's see. You got your, just take us back to the beginning. Come on. You got your public welfare emergency, which is dealing with fires, natural disasters, or man-made ones, disease in human beings, animals, and plants, accident or pollution. So yeah, you get your, there's all sorts of crazy stuff in that one where they can confiscate your property, just do whatever, take it all, and they might compensate you for it. And then yeah, it's got the 3 others. It's got the one we were just talking about, the public, not the public, where the heck is it? Public order emergency. Then there's international emergency and the war measure. I'm not sure, because I'm not very well versed in legalities and acts and stuff, if this means that he has control over all 4, like you could just, or do you have to specify which one in the act that you can do? Not really sure how that works. We have here, remember back in March of 2020, they were talking about doing the Emergencies Act, and that's where we learned about the confiscation of property and stuff. So I'll just read a little bit from it. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the provincial and territorial leaders spoke Monday about the possibility of invoking the Federal Emergencies Act as the COVID-19 pandemic spreads, legislation that empowers Ottawa to do just about anything that it thinks is necessary to cope with the crisis. Trudeau briefed them on the current state of federal efforts to combat the pandemic that has infected some 2,500 Canadians and shuttered many businesses, leaving more than 1 million people temporarily unemployed. Imagine, back when there was only 2,500 people infected. Some premiers were eager to, that's like literally, because they declared the pandemic on, was it March 11th? If I'm not mistaken. Was it 3/11? March 11th? I think so. Shortly after they talk about this. It's nuts. Some premiers were eager for a coordinated national response, while others were concerned about what invoking the act would mean for local decision makers. Multiple provincial sources told the CBC News after the call there was no unanimity. Okay, I'm done with that word. I know the word, just can't say it. Let's just skip forward because this part's boring. One of the key elements of the Emergency Act is that it is an override over the provinces. Now remember how they came up with that clip of Trudeau talking about the notwithstanding clause, And they took it all out of context and made it sound like Trudeau was going to use it to take away all your rights. But no, what he was talking about, if you looked at the actual article it came from and the full clip of it, he was talking about how the provinces have this non-standing clause. So any decisions that he makes federally, they can ignore it because they have the non-standing clause and they can do what they want. They have the provincial powers to do that. And this is what the Emergencies Act would nullify all their power and it would all be controlled under a central government. So I think that was purposely put out there. Is that another preparing you for the eventual Emergencies Act? I don't know if this is going to happen in this particular case because I think there's things that are still to come that would be much more suited for this, but this could be just another warm up for the thing. Or they're going to use this to I closed this other article, but there was someone talking about I should have kept that article up. I could grab it again real quick, but let's go through this first. One of the key elements of the Emergency Act is that it overrides over the provinces. It takes powers that normally are only in the hands of provinces or even municipalities and put them in the federal level, he said. Trudeau promised to work closely with the provinces and territories if he takes this step, something the Emergency Act already demands of Ottawa. Asked Monday if he thought invoking the act is necessary, Ontario Premier Doug Ford said it's a decision of Trudeau to make. Every single province is different, so we want to make sure that we still have the authority to make decisions that we require for the health and the economy in each province, Ford told reporters ahead to call with Trudeau and other first ministers. Unprecedented powers. The Emergency Act, a sweeping piece of legislation passed in 1988 as a replacement for the controversial War Measures Act, has never been used. The Act gives powers to the Prime Minister to respond to 4 different types of emergency, so it gives him power over all 4. I'm guessing he can use all of them. Scenarios: public welfare, national disasters, disease, public order, civil unrest, international emergencies, and war emergencies. The Act grants Cabinet the ability to take special temporary measures that may not be appropriate in normal times to cope with an emergency and resulting fallout during an urgent and critical situation. Now, another thing I was kind of thinking when I was reading about this, what if this is just, they're using this Ottawa thing to declare the Emergencies Act without, because it's normally used, the War Measures Act, back when it was the War Measures Act, was used for World War I and World War II, right? And you know how we're looming on a World War III kind of scenario here. What if this is a way to bring about the Emergencies Act without doing it based on war, but gives them all the powers for a war measure? Kind of like a sneak move here, using this as an excuse to declare the emergency and get all the powers for whatever purpose. It's just a working theory. I have nothing to back it up. It's kind of something that popped in my head. I'm now sharing with you. The Act grants Cabinet the ability to take special temporary measures that may not be appropriate. Okay, I read that. If it gives Cabinet unprecedented powers to assume jurisdiction from the provinces in areas like health and commerce. Invoking the Act might help the federal government close some interprovincial borders to stop the spread of COVID-19, a measure that would have been almost unimaginable only days ago. But some provinces, such as Nova Scotia PEI, already policing land crossings as they order. Okay, this is old news, just so you know. The Emergency Act could allow for the creation of travel passes to curtail movement, for example. We already have that without the Emergency Act, so. The Act also grants Cabinet powers to evacuate people and remove personal property from any specific area, acquire property, direct any person or any class of person to render essential services, regulate distribution and availability of essential goods, services, and resources. They can take over all your grocery stores, and then you'd have those big bread lines, right? They could do that with these powers. They could do anything they want like that. Authorize emergency payments, just like CERB, so we'd have your universal basic income, basically, if they wanted. Establish shelters and hospitals and impose criminal sanctions. The Act allows the federal government to essentially normalize parts of the economy wherever it thinks it's necessary, as Cabinet can assume control, the restoration, and maintenance of public utilities and services to ensure the well-being of Canadians. Jack Lindsay is a professor in the Department of Applied Disaster and Emergency Studies at Brandon University in Manitoba and expert in the country's emergency measures legislation. Oh, Stella wants out in the furnace room here. Now, Stella, get up. Go on. Lindsay said he doesn't see the point of invoking federal legislation at the time when the provinces already have their own measures in place. Blah, blah, blah. We already know this. Old news. So, yeah. Enforcement measures for returning travelers. Remember this hideous creature? She looks like a reptile. So we want to do Quarantine Act. Yeah, that was about it for this. There was they mentioned the War Measures Act by Elliot Turdo. Let me grab that article I had nixed. Where is it? There we go. This is a recent article. And this is about the part where I needed it, so perfect. Where does he talk about it? Okay. So this is a opinion piece by some guy. Some turd. Doesn't matter. He's like, oh yeah, you know what? He's got the Wesley Work. WW equals 33 people. Okay. Let's start. Let's start about here. Wait, right here. First thing to note is the Emergency Act contains provisions for dealing with a public order emergency. It would give the government extraordinary but strictly time-limited, 30 days, power that would be contingent on parliamentary approval and subject to the rights protections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Power could include, well, they're already ignoring the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, so what the hell does it matter? Powers include prohibition of public assembly in a specific area, the securing of protected places, authorization to render essential services, e.g. towing away the trucks being used in the protests, fines and imprisonments. Such powers clearly apply to the circumstances of the current protest. This is, however, a catch or two. The Act is limited to emergency that arises from threats to the security of Canada that is so serious as to be a national emergency. The Act's definition of a national emergency presents a high bar, one that seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians and is of such proportions or nature to exceed the capacity or authority of a province to deal with. The protest wasn't seen as meeting these criteria at its onset. The more it metastasizes, the more clear it becomes a provincial sign on by the becomes a I read it wrong, sorry. The more clear it becomes, period. I didn't see the period. A provincial sign-on by the Ontario government would seal things. More challenging is the Act's definition of a threat to the security of Canada, where it relies on the Canadian Security Intelligence Service Act, legislation passed 37 years ago. The CSIS Act defines threats to the security of Canada as limited to 4 categories: espionage or sabotage for purposes of the current protests. Nope. So that's his opinion. Nope, that doesn't fit that thing. Foreign influence activities, not really, given the clause would be applied to state-sponsored interference. Threats or use of acts of serious violence, quote, for the purpose of achieving a political, religious, or ideological objective. Quotation or brackets, not yet. Covert and unlawful activities that would undermine or lead to destruction of the constitutionally established system of government in Canada. More brackets, big stretch. What's wrong here? The government is sitting on an unusable legislation that is not fit for this purpose and has never been modernized to meet the changing needs of societal protection. Oh, there you go. Does it need to be modernized, people, to fit this criteria? That could be another thing we could be looking at. There is nothing here to help the governance central hold. While it provides a woeful excuse for inaction and buck passing, in place of an unusable emergency act is What is needed is rapid passage by Parliament of amended legislation that would add to the definition of threats to the security of Canada a new category: deliberate and reckless interference with listed critical infrastructure, to include offices of government and the courts, health services, and border crossings. After that should come enforcement action. When the protest is dismantled and cleared away, Federal Commission of Inquiry must be called to learn much-needed lessons about how we understand threats to national security and embed these in our laws, enforcement practices, and public understanding. So that could be something that we see come out of this whole situation, is an amendment to the 1988 Emergencies Act to fit the criteria of people who want to peacefully protest against the tyrannical government and their imposing restrictions and mandates. That's about it, folks. That's all I had. I wanted to talk about that real quick because it just came out 10, 11 hours ago that he had that meeting, and he's having another meeting today. And we'll see what comes out of that, people. So, we get a few things possibly out of this. He could declare the act, and we could see what it's like for the first time. We could be the first to experience this Emergencies Act. Or, like that person suggested, it's not really usable in this situation. So we could see an amendment coming forward to make it usable. Or, I don't know, maybe something will happen that'll make it fit the criteria all of a sudden. Like, I don't know, a little FF, if you know what I mean, operation could occur that would make this protest no longer considered a peaceful protest and a national emergency. Okay, so thank you everyone again, as always, for your time and attention in these times that are so crazy. I appreciate you coming to me to listen to my opinions. And I ask that if you appreciate my work, that you consider possibly supporting it. Support can be as simple as liking and sharing this video. And if you would like to do more than that, there's links to do so in the description below. With that said, this is Venomous reporting from the brave new world. I'll catch you all next time.
Are you talking to me? No way, Paul.